Yeah. Politics for sure. All right, let's go. Let's get started on this section. Imperialism in Africa. All right. Yeah. The Great War of Democracy, or from Schmittler's point of view, the Great War of Fascism, is being fought out in Africa as fiercely as anywhere else. It is not only the question of strategy. The competing imperialism want Africa first and foremost for the sake of Africa, a fact which the democratic propagandists disregard with the Olympian sublimity of complete ignorance and complete hypocrisy. Schmittler, at any rate, says plainly, that he wants his living space. But let us pass. Let that pass. What we want to do here is to state a few facts about Africa and its roles in an imperialist economy and its future in a socialist world, so tightly knit in the world market which capitalism has created, that we shall find ourselves dealing with the fundamental problems of modern society and the solutions of the permanent crises, not only in Africa, but on the world scale. Oh my God. Okay. But up to 1914, the British bourgeoisie had not the faintest idea of the revolutionary violence which capitalism was nursing in its bosom, particularly in the colonies. An obscure Russian revolutionary exile named Lenin wrote confidently about the inevitability emergence of the proletariat in India and China as the leaders of the coming nationalist revolution. But which British politician or world publicist worried about himself about that? It is most valuable to reread that these wise men of 30 years ago used to say about the world and what we used to say. But first the Russian Revolution, and then the wave of nationalist revolutions which swept through the British and French empires after a war gave the British bourgeoisie a fright which goes far to explain their insatiable desire for appeasement. All the cunning, all the lies, the violence, the sanctimonious cruelty, which have so distinguished the British ruling class through centuries, proved powerless to stifle the great Indian Revolution. And though Churchill says little in public about India, he thinks about it only less than he thinks about Germany. Oof, my copy crashed. Okay, I can wait a couple seconds. Hey, Carrot, welcome back. Thank you. Hey, Brianna, you're still here. We're doing, yeah. Oh my gosh, I already got a fucking restriction, a visibility restriction. Jesus Christ. All right, I'll give it a couple seconds and then I'll go. Oh, don't wait. Okay, cool. India and Africa. Indian Revolution. This is from India, so I can say this word. Indian Revolution took British imperialism by surprise. But as a full disintegration of capitalist society, its colonial consequences began to force itself upon the British bourgeoisie. A very distinctively enunciated current of thought took shape. We have been taken by surprise in India. If we do not act in Africa, we shall be taken by surprise there also. The climax was the formation of an African Research Society under the auspices of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the disguise that British government assumes when it wants to investige economic and political questions without official responsibility. A powerful commission was appointed consisting of the ablest men who not like ableism, but ableist like they're, I don't give a fuck. Like they were able-bodied men, I guess. Ablest men who could be found in England for the task. An economic advisor to the Bank of England, an Oxford professor of colonial history, the editor of Nature, Julian Huxley, Arthur Salter, Lord Lagarde after Cecil Rose, one of the greatest African proconsuls, and some others all under the chairmanship of that well-known liberal, Amir of fascism, the defender of the British and American way of life. We refer to the late Lord Luthien. The committee decided to make a complete survey of colonial Africa, African survey, and appointed Lord Haley, the governor of the United Province of India, to carry it out. Special research were commissioned preparatory to the actual work in Africa. The most important being a study of capitalist investments in Africa, capitalist investment in South Africa. For Professor Finkel of Johannesburg, the surveyed 1,837 pages of the Frankel volume, page 487 pages, were published in 1938 by the Royal Institute. They constitute an indictment of capitalist civilization, impossible to find outside the pages of Marxist writings. Frankel writes with the freedom of one without official responsibility. Haley was the caution of the old civil servant, with the understatement of the Englishman and the evangelical mode of expression, which is part of the British imperialist burden. Both, however, come to identical conclusions. Imperialism in Africa is bankrupt. There is only one way to save the situation, and that is to raise the standard of living, culture, and productivity of the native Africans. The full significance of this economic conclusion can only be understood against the political background of Africa, for it is the first law of existence and self-preservation of every European in Africa, that the existence of European civilization in Africa, and by European civilizations, these people mean, of course, European imperialism, depends upon the one fact: the maintenance of the African in the position of inferiority, segregation, and backwardness in which he is at present. In this bourgeois thought, by the process of separating what is dialectically inseparable, has reached the conclusion that it saved itself, it must destroy itself. What is Africa? Lord Haley's survey compromise all this African south of the Sahara, and was not confined to British colonies, for British wanted to find out officially all that there was to be found about Africa. The African population of this territory is estimated at 100 million. Of this, the European population is about 2.25 million. Of these, over 2 million are in the Union of South Africa alone. For the rest, you can find figures like these. French West Africa's population is around figures 14 million. White population 19,000. Belgian Congo population 10 million. White population 18,000. In Kenya, which is supposed to have areas particularly suited to white colonization, African population 3 million. White population 18,000. In Nigeria, African population 19 million, white population 5,000. North in the Zambeze, the white population is barely 100,000. The area of the territory is about 1.26 million square miles, 3 times the size of the United States of America. Colonial Africa is, for the most part, one vast concentration camp with a few thousand white slave drivers. In India, there is an Indian industrial and landowning class. In China, the same. In Africa, there are just slaves and overseers. The British government 3 years ago awoke theoretically to the fact that this cannot go on, for it does not pay. Yeah, she memes. Oh, you talking about the one with the thing? That's not a good meme. Like people get triggered about it, and they get reactionary responses from it because people react to that as like being Nazify being Nazis and stuff. So it's understandable how people can react to that. You know, it's very edgy. That's for sure. You're correct. The railway fiasco. The mercantilists system had exploited Africa as a field of commerce for slaves, and secondly, pocatile, the beads, colored cotton, and other rubbish for which black slaves were exchanged. With the decline of the mercantile system after the American War of Independence, Africa yeah, it could have been just a meme, but I can understand how people can like see that wrong, because it is like a red flag, you know. It's a red flag. So yeah, Africa receded out of the picture of European imperialism until the period of capital export. Oh, no worries. By 1935, the total capital investment from abroad amounted to $1,111,000,000. It says 6,111 million, which is 6 billion, I think, of this amount. 77% in it is British territories. The British investors have supplied 75% of this total. The trade is the same. In 1935, the total trade of British territories formed 85% of the total trade of Africa. In 1907, it was 84%, and for years it has never fallen below 80%. Britain dominates the whole of native Africa, the French, Belgium, and Portuguese colonies being merely satellites of this swollen imperialist monster. Of the total of over $6 billion invested from abroad in Africa, nearly one half consists of loans and grants to governments, while a little less than a quarter of the whole is $1,335,000,000, to be exact, has been invested in railways, which hang like the weight of chains of European capitalists and black labor in Africa. Because what they do is they make all the trains go out towards like the metropole systems to meet with the like the harbors to be shipped out. Because we take the raw material, either we'll like create the commodities through free labor or small labor, but those commodities will be sold on the market for a higher price than what has been pulled out. Plus, they're highly exploitative, and usually all those transportations do not run for public stuff or for their own economy. Instead, it either gets fully processed and created and then put on, or it gets put to the imperialist countries to be made and put out into the market for a higher price. You missed a couple sentences? Okay. I don't know. Africa did not need them. Railways must serve flourishing industrial areas and densely populating agricultural regions, or they must open up new lands, as in the United States, along with thriving populations developed and provides the railway with traffic. Except in the mining regions of South Africa, all these conditions are absent, yet railways were needed for the benefit of European investors and heavy industries. For some vague purpose known as the, quote, opening up of the continent, and for the all-important strategic purposes. The result is that in nearly every colony today, railroads have been developed by the governments, and up to today, only governments can afford to operate them. Most of them have been overbuilt. As a result of this expenditure, the railways have been burdened with large interest obligations, which cause excessively high rates of imported or local traffic, capitalism, and slavery. In the attempt to improvise the production for exports, which is necessary to meet these heavy interest charges, various types of uneconomic production have been embarked upon. Uneconomic in themselves, chiefly of the one crop type, is subjected to the fluctuations of the world market. Some of these have now become burdens upon the territories concerned. As a result, Frankel comes to the following remarkable conclusion, quote, governments have been bought up time and time again against the fundamental difficulties that capital investment in itself cannot lead to economic development, but requires a concomitant expansion of other factors of production. Capital alone cannot solve the economic problem. In other words, capital cannot expect to flourish if the African native remains a slave. A colony after colony, the complaints are the same. In 1934, the general manager of the Nigeria government railway reported, and here's his report. The trade of the colonies is not yet developed to anything like the transport capacity of its railway route mileage. No private railway company could have constructed so much mileage. The whole colony was greatly benefited from the transport facilities, where the annual capital charges of the railway to be set alongside the aggregate income in the population which it serves. It would be clear that, short of the valuable bulk mineral discovery, the main direction in which the annual capital charges could be met year by year from railways earnings must be the carriage by it of a very large volume of agriculture products, and the whole of the volume wherever the railway can reach it. A sufficient volume of export products does not now exist. Nigeria is one of the most prosperous of the colonies, and this chiefly because it has a large native peasantry. The railways reports from the French Congo, the Belgian Congo, say exactly the same. Only they say it in French, and with more despair, because the native peasantry is absent from both these huge colonies. Frankel concludes, in general, African railways have been constructed on the basis of a too optimistic view of the rate of economic development in the territories. They serve, failing the development of new mineral resources. Considerable further railways constructions in the near future will not be warranted from the economic point of view. In other words, goodbye to railways. The mining merry-go-round. In 1935, the export of gold was 47.6% of the total export of Africa. Most of this gold has been produced in the Union of South Africa. This fabulous, quote, wealthy of African state, with 90% of the white population of colonial Africa and the envy of all other African colonies, is in reality one of the most unstable economies in the world, and none knows it better than the South Africans themselves. Until the discovery of diamonds in 1857, the economic development of South Africa has been almost exclusively agricultural. South Africa has of no importance. With the development of the diamond fields and afterwards of gold, the whole economy gradually grew independent upon the income of these industries. For 25 years, the legislator and the electorate have declared that the country must, for its own future salvation, find some way and means of gaining income other than from mining. They have failed completely. With the expectation of wool today in that vast country, there is not one important agricultural commodity which does not depend on protection or on the maintenance of the artificial price structure based on direct subsidies. Exactly the same situation exists in industries. Hold on a second. Yeah. Well, it's because they set up the railways not to like help with their like economy inwards. They set up the railway to help the like imperialists, to make it convenient for the imperialists to extract resources and shit. So Upon this unhealthy basis of crafting another vicious economic malformation. Oh no! Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and write that out. Yeah, I'm interested. I know it lasted a long time. Yeah, in 1934 and 1935, 41% of the workers employed a private industrial undertaking were Europeans. They took 74% of the wages of salaries paid, equivalent to $1,010 per head, and remaining 59% of the workers were non-Europeans who obtained 26% of the wages and salaries, equivalent to $245 per head. In government undertakings, Europeans consisting of 63.3% of the employees took 91% of the total wages and salaries paid. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. The remaining 9% of the wages was divided among 33.7% of non-European employed. Yeah, I bet. Yeah, okay. Yeah, now I understand. Thank you. The organized labor movement, i.e. the aristocracy of labor, shortly after World War I, forced through the C.L.R. Act, which prohibited skilled labor to Africans. It is joined by reactionary South African farmers who keep the majority of natives on their farms as a state of peonage and slavery. Thus, the distinguishing characteristics of South African labor are 1. A low average productivity, 2. An artificial wage structure based on the revenue from gold and diamonds, and 3. The literal pauperization and degradation of 6 million black people by less than 1.5 of the white population of 2 million. Less than 1.5 because there is a huge poor white population. In the mining industry itself, the ratio reaches incredible proportions. The average pay for the European employee in the mines is in around the figures of $155 a month. That of the native is about $20. The official title of this discrimination is the civilized labor policy. Jesus Christ. God damn, dude. Look at the fucking difference. 155 to 20 a month. Jesus Christ. A ruinous policy. Lord Haley sees that this is a ruinous business. He knows that both in industry and agriculture, ultimately, the equally efficient and less costly producer would be the liberated African. As he states in quotes, the accumulating weights of evidence would seem to inspire doubts as to whether European agriculture could do more than make a very modest living as a return for hard work, even in good times, and be a constant recurrent charge upon the revenues of the governments in bad. He admits that, quote, though there may be both political and theoretical justification for the adoption of the civilized labor policy, its necessity must nevertheless be regretted. Haley should be given the task to explain to the labor aristocrats and Boer farmers, white farmers, Boer farmers were white farmers, exactly how beneficial a change would be. No amount of understatement would save him from being lynched. The significance of South Africa is this: most of the other colonies in Africa were either built on the same model or wished to haven they could be. This is why they sigh for the discovery and some bulk minerals. They could then pay the interest on railways and live on the rest, while the native does the work in the mines. There are no unions to subsidize him. The Europeans is staring in the face the fact that he cannot compete with the native African. He can prevent the African from cultivating coffee, as in Kenya, owing to the physical and mental capability. But the world market such as it is, refuses to pay both the African for doing the work and the European farmer for living like a gentleman, drinking whiskey and playing polo. Everywhere, therefore, says Haley, the progress of the European system of economy is likely in the future to be linked up with the exploitation of mines, the commerce, and with certain specialized forms of agriculture production, generally require capital from their development. Everywhere in Rhodesia, French and Belgian Congo, French and British West Africa, wherever except in South Africa, the Southern Rhodesia, we have seen upon what these areas depend. Their ideal is ruthless suppression of the native. All right, we'll try you too, but we're not going to get much. We're not going to get that much, Fatima. Haley murmurs deprecatingly that the possibilities of the complete fulfillment of this ideal depends on economic factors, such for instance as the continuation of gold production, which may themselves be subject to modification. It certainly looks today, 3 years after Haley wrote, as if South African gold export may soon be subjected to modification. For other non-mining communities, their quote future economic prosperity depends more upon the general development of native economic activities than to the results of European enterprises. Most important of all for British imperialism, he says flatly that there is no further field for capital export except for mining. After a little over 50 years, the degradation of the population without parallel in the history of modern capitalism, this is where the imperialists have reached conditions of the workers. Haley had to be careful. Frankel had no cause to be. In his work, packed with statistical tables, Frankel has one theme. He states it on page 7. The task is, quote, to broaden the ideas and heighten the creativity possibilities of citizens in the wilder society. To realize this is the key to colonial statesmanship. In South Africa and all over East Africa, the African is bound by a series of past laws to particular employers. Virtual slavery, says Frankel. In this, no exaggeration to say that a basic cause of the low average income of the inhabitants of the Union is the lack of economic mobility of its workers, both black and white. We are back again at the starting point of this study. Progress involves change. Inhabitants change and inhabitant progress. Like Haley, he calls for capital investment, if even not immediately profit producing, but on the conditions. In the last resort, however, the future of capital investment, like the future of all African economic progress, will depend on freeing the African peoples from the factor which we have checked their progress in the past, and the artificial restriction which is some territories like prevent the unfolding of their abilities. In the 20th century experience in Africa has proved anything at all, it is that the wealth of Africa has as yet hardly been discovered, simply because it lies deep in the soil of Africa itself. Only by the cooperant efforts of Africans and Europeans will it be unearthed. The curtain has only just risen in the African scene. Indeed, the 20th century opens the area of constructive and creative activities by Western powers in Africa. Frankel has stumbled on a tremendous conclusion here. He does not talk about raising the standard of living and such like primitive panaceas for the contradiction of capitalism. He has left the field of distribution and tackled the problem at its roots, at the point of production, Marxism and the colonies. What is happening in Africa and what the British imperialists think about it concerns every American worker, not only black people. The contradictions of capitalist production expresses themselves in the concentration of wealth at one end of the society and the mastery at the other. Every thinking American worker knows the fact, but these contradictions also express themselves in the concentration of wealth in rich nations like America, Britain, and France, and Belgium, and the concentration of misery in poor ones like India, China, and Africa. There are hundreds of millions of Africans living in destitution, over 400 million Chinese, nearly 400 million Indians from India. Roosevelt talks about about a third of the nation. These people constitute half of the world. It is capitalism which is destroying them. It is destroying the world. It has now confessed that in Africa it is bankrupt. They must therefore rid themselves of capitalism, for the same reason that the worker in the West must rid himself of capitalism to use capital and not be used by it. Frankel has hit upon a discovery, but he has made a profound mistake in calling what Africa needs capital. Nearly 100 years ago, a wage labor and capital. Marx defined capital. It is the accumulating labor and land, not accumulated labor. That was the chief means of material production in all societies previous to capitalist societies. Capital, however, is accumulating labor in the definite social relations. It is only the domination of past accumulated materialized labor over immediate living labor that stamps the accumulated labor with the character of capital. Capital does not consist in the fact that accumulating labor serves living labor as a means of new production. It consists in the fact that living labor serves cumulated. See, now I gotta hear it. I'm like doing the whole questioning myself. Accumulated labor as means of preserving and multiplying this exchange value, as Marx expresses in the Communist Manifesto. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In the communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Frankel wants to promote widening, enriching the existence of the Africans, not to save his immortal soul, but to save the African economy. Thus, what Frankel is really calling for is not capital, but communism. Haley, however, merely observes, for that, no more accumulated labor. As usual, it is the Marxists of the bourgeoisie who face realities. The inherent unworkability of the capital relation is seen very starkly in Africa. This is due to the advanced stage of European capital development. When capitalism began to penetrate into Africa, the primitive character of African labor, and the added sharpness of race differentiation. What Frankel does not know is that what he sees it clearly in Africa was seen by Marx 3 generations ago in relations not to Africa, but to all the capitalist societies. Marx had little to say about socialist societies, particularly about its basis and socialist organization of labor. That new organization of labor would be accomplished by the proletariat, and as Lenin said most emphatically, the proletariat alone could accomplish it. But for Marx, Africans' problem was the problem of capitalist society, and only socialism could solve it. The actual wealth of society and the possibilities of continual expansion of its processes of reproduction do not depend upon the surplus labor, but upon its productivity and upon the more or less fertile conditions of production under which it is performed. Capital, Volume 2. He rarely spoke of the socialism without coming back to this, and perhaps this most emphatic statement to the same effect is found in his chapter on machinery, and modern industry. Modern industry, through its catastrophes, imposes the necessity of recognizing as a fundamental law of production variations of work, consequently fitness of the laborer for varied work, consequently the greatest possible development of his varied aptitudes. It becomes a question of life and death for society to adapt the mode of production to the normal functions of this law. Modern industry indeed compels societies under penalty of death to replace the detail worker of today, crippling by lifelong repetition on one of the same trivial operations, and thus reduced to the mere fragment of a man by the fully developed individual fit for the variety of labor, already to face any challenge of production, and to whom the different social functions he performs are but as many modes of giving free scope to his own natural and required powers. Capital, Volume 1. The only solution. Are we doing okay? Doing okay? I hope we're doing all right. Hope everybody's doing okay. Going through these pretty quick. This is pretty good stuff. All right. This is better than the last one, I bet. Than the last couple of chapters about Trotsky. Ugh. The only solution. It is the only solution to the permanent crisis. Marx did not use phrases like life and death lightly. Let living labor use accumulated labor to develop itself. The problem of expansion will be solved. Yet accumulated labor use living labor only for the sake of expanding accumulated labor, and it automatically ruins its capacity to expand. No need to point out here the monumental researches of scientific exactness, with which Marx demonstrates the inevitability of his conclusion. It is to Frankel's credit that he came to the same conclusion after the most thorough examination ever made of capitalist investments in Africa. His mistake is to believe that this accumulated labor can ever be at the disposal of the African unless by means of the socialist revolution in Africa and in Europe. One more word remains to be said. All the great communists have known that man is the greatest of all productive forces. In the general collapse of revolutionary ideology, which has kept pace with the degeneration of the Russian Revolution, there has grown up a pseudo-Marxist or economic analysis which sees all sorts of possibilities in the technical and institutional organization of society, without the slightest considerations for the role of labor. The most recent is Mr. Burnham, who informs us that the managerial society will solve the problems of expansion of colonial countries which capitalism cannot solve. How? He does not say. Schmittler, however, lets us that the free choice of trades and professions by black people leads, he's the inward by the way, by black people leads to social assimilation, which in turn produces racial assimilation. The occupation of the black colony peoples and their functions in the labor process of the new order will therefore be entirely determined by the Germans. And again, black people will have no active or passive electoral rights in the German colonial empire. They are forbidden access to railways, streetcars, restaurants, motion pictures, and all public establishment. In other words, Schmittler proposed to expand African economy by continuing to degrade African labor, the same old bankrupt policy of British imperialism. It is a contradiction that can be solved by socialism and not by Schmittler, Panzer division, a race propaganda of Goebbels, nor the theoretical evasion of Burnham. All right, chapter 9. To and from the Finland station, a review of the Finland station. I have no idea what this is about. Hello. We don't have a lot of coins, my friend, but we can try. We haven't been getting coins. I appreciate you, though, Yusuf, but we're not getting a lot of coins, Yusuf, so you can try. So now we're out of Africa and we're back into Europe. Edmund Wilson found his way to the Finland station in the wake of the proletarian revolution. But the revolution is not an ellipse of Wilson, and Wilson has lost his way. But Wilson is to be taken seriously, for he has studied history and grappled with the Marxist material. Wilson rejects the dialectic. The Marxist movement is in the dilemma here. Engels said that the test of dialectic is nature. Lenin, too, knew that Engels' illustration about seeds were merely popularization, that the demonstration of the dialectic lay in the study and analysis of science. Nobody has done any of the necessary work. It is as if Marx had written nothing about capitalist production except the Communist Manifesto. Wilson rejects also the labor theory of value, which is another story. Marx dealt beautifully with a Wilson of his day. In his letters to Killing Kungengelmann, July 1868, Marx showed himself rather short-tempered with the objection. Hello. Here we go. The nonsense about the necessity of proving the concept of value arises from the complete ignorance, but the subject dealt with and of the method of science. Every child knows that a country which ceases to work, it will not say for a year, but for a few weeks would die. Every child knows too that the mass of products corresponding to the different need requires different and qualitatively determined masses of the total labors of society. That is this necessity is distributing social labor in definite proportions cannot be done away with by the particular form of social production, but can only change the form of assuming it's self-evident. The science consists precisely in working out how the law of value operates, so that if one wanted at a very beginning to explain all the phenomenon which apparently contradict that law, one would have to give the science there before the science, which is precisely Ricardo's mistake. Interesting. Now compare Wilson. Nor was it necessary to accept the metaphysics of the labor theory of value and to argue it from an a priori. Metaphysics, Marx thinks that every child can see it, and starting from that he solves, as Wilson admits, the future of capitalism. Most of Wilson's other objections are answered already by Marx himself. Wilson believes Marx to have demonstrated that capitalism must have an end, and demonstrate also, quote, the necessity for socialism. Marx demonstrated not necessity but inevitability. But let that pass for the moment. Where does Wilson stand? For after all, that is what matters. And I have another visibility restriction. Just leave me alone, dude. Just leave me alone. That's all you gotta do. Just leave me alone. The capitalist world, as we see it, it couldn't be worse. What is his attitude? And here Wilson breaks down the British worker, through long subordination to machines and meager lives, have become, quote, unfitted for class politics and class action. The British ruling class knows that this is nonsense. On America, he is worse. Marx, he says, did not foresee that the absence of feudalism made possible in America in, quote, genuine social democratization. Yeah. American people more nearly share the same criteria than everywhere else in the civilized world. In America, money is always changing hands so rapidly that the class line cannot get very deep. We have a class quarrel out as we go along. The blindness of this is this. Even Roosevelt, the grand, pajandrum from Bologna, baloney. Talks about a, quote, third of the nation in poverty and, quote, economic royalists. If you don't approve me, I don't need to confirm it. The National Industrial Relations broader report of Roosevelt in 1939. The opportunity for the higher standard of living is so great, the social frustration from the failure to obtain it is so real that other means will undoubtedly be sought if a democratic solution is not worked out. The time for finding such a solution is not limited. And while Rome burns, Wilson sings fiddle-dee-dee. Why is this intelligent? A scholarly man is so foolish on the issues of all issues. His book tells why. It is a long study of a decline of the revolutionary tradition in French literature and the origins of the developments of revolutionary socialism in Europe and America, told chiefly through personal studies and key figures. Wilson plays about with the, oh my gosh, psychoanalyst in a unpardonably light-minded manner. But his biographical work is interesting. His historical studies are valuable, and his essays on Michelet are splendid. He sees how after the Revolution of 1848 and the Commune of 1871, the French bourgeoisie could not write robust history any longer. I don't have heartburn, but I keep burping. Renan's portrait of Marcus Aurelius, he sees as a projection of the personality of the French bourgeoisie after the Franco-German War and the Commune. The book is full of many such judgments, large and small, not blatant, but accurate and sensitive, never superficial and sometimes profound. I think Wilson underestimated how desperately Taine, after the Commune, turned on himself and raged at the French Revolution with a manic, like a wild person. But all this is a badly needed contribution to the historical materialist elucidation of his history. In all history writing, all the influence of class struggle stands out like a big nose on the small face. There's, for instance, in his history of the revolutionary and Neapolitan period, was Democrats in those parts written before 1848, Bonapartists in the parts written during the Second Republic, when Bonaparte's nephew nearly put him in jail, ending the history with attacks on Bonapartism, while Mitford, an English historian, published an innocuous first volume of the history of Greece in 1784. But the French Revolution taking place in 1789, Mitford devoted the rest of his work to a fanatical attack on Greek democracy. Someday, when a materialist history of a history is written, it will be a marvelous verification of Marxist approach in one of the most comic books ever published. Wilson is a beautiful example. Wilson is a beautiful example of the same process. He analyzes it so well. Despite his disagreements, he has swept along by Marx and the proletariat. And at the Finland station, he is as excited as any of those who travel in the sealed train. He writes a brilliant and, for him, enthusiastic essay on Lenin's revolutionary personality. But the proletariat since then knows only defeats. Hence Wilson's continued fascination by Marxism, his abstract belief in the necessity for socialism, but his opium dreams about American democracy. The intellectual loves to show the class struggle acting on other people. He hates like hell for it to be applied to himself. There is only one way to overcome this, and that is to accept it. Identify yourself with the fundamental class and go where it goes. Mount with it when it mounts, and fall with it when it falls. On the basis you will commit some blunders, but you are always in the position of judge and intellectual command in contending forces of society. You can do this as a person identifies with the revolutionary struggle of the proletariat, or the struggle for the preservation of the bourgeoisie. But once you stand in the middle, looking from one side to the other, all the knowledge and intellectual honesty in the world will not save you from futility and folly. And even worse may befall. For Wilson, in this book, consistently lays stress upon Marx's, quote, Jewish blood, and he shows a truly Olympian claim in his remarks to Yahtzee Germany. Both are bad signs, especially in a man who nourishes such illusions about American bourgeois democracy. June 1941. Yeah, right? Okay, so it refers to an influential, pompous official or famous. Thank you. Chapter 10. The American tradition of the working class movement in perspective. But I considered this certain, the purely bourgeois basis with no pre-bourgeois swindle behind it. The corresponding colossal energy of the development will one day bring about a change which will astound the whole world. Once the Americans start getting it, will be with an energy of violence compared with which we have Europe. In Europe shall be mere children. Wait. I don't know if it's Edmund Wilson. Oh, it was? Okay. Okay. All right. Thus, on the 30th of March, 1892, Engels wrote from London to a friend in America. Marx and Engels knew that in every country, in whatever continent, socialist revolution denote the seizure of power by the working class under circumstances dictated by the law of uneven development and historical particularities of each country. I don't think so. It doesn't seem like. I think someone's writing about it. I'm not sure. But they were sensitive to the subjective qualities of different sections of the international proletariat. Thus, they looked upon the German proletariat as the most theoretical in Europe, and English workers were somewhat slow, but once they had gained some advantages, they did not let it go lightly, etc. In his last year, Engels always wrote about the American proletariat in such terms as the above. It is therefore important to see what Engels thought, why he thought it, to examine the historical development since his death, and to see how far his analysis and expectations have been justified. This useful at all times is particularly necessary today because Engels was stirred to write about America at the time when it seemed to him not a national labor party was at last on its way. Engels based his views on two fundamental facts. The country in 1886 is rich, vast, expanding. That is the special economic characteristics. Its special historic character is that its political institutions are purely bourgeoisie, unleavened by feudal remnants. These combined to give to the economic and tremendous power of the development of this national characteristic is the necessity imbued in the proletariat. Yet at the same time, quote, in every young country where the development is the predominantly material nature, there is a, quote, uncertain backwardness of thought, a clinging to traditions, connecting with the foundation of the new nationality. The exigencies of practical labor and the concentration of capital have produced a contempt for all theory. In such a country, the people must become conscious of their own social interests by making, quote, blunders upon blunders. But always he insists that when the workers begin their political development, it will be like nothing ever seen before. They will go faster than anywhere else, even though on a singular road, which seems from the theoretical standpoint to the almost in the wild road. It would be perhaps most fruitful to begin with a comparison between the economic and political development of the working class movements in America with the working class movements in Britain. For Marx and Engels, England was the model capitalist country in their day, the most fully developed. It is the easier to do so because of, in his observation of America, Engels consistently referred to earlier parallels and future developments in Britain. Interesting. Yeah, please gift everybody. I don't have many gifts. The national tradition. The traditions connected with the foundation, we're doing good. With the traditions connected with the foundations of a new nationality date to before the American Revolution. But just as the French Revolution is the foundation of the modern French nation, the English Revolution in the 17th century is the foundation of modern Britain. So is the modern American nation finds its roots in 1776. This revolution differs sharply from the other two. 150 years before in Britain, and Cromwellian Revolution produced a powerful combination of petite bourgeoisie and neo-proletarian elements. They raised a program of political democracy which was not realized in Britain until over 200 years afterward. Though they raised the question of property openly in debate with Cromwell, they were not communists. The real communists, the leveler and the diggers, were the small minority to the left and of this movement, which was so large and well organized that it almost drove Cromwell and his associates into the arms of the monarchy. We had to suppress these formidable revolutionaries by force. Carlyle calls them, I don't know if I can say that, before their time. I don't know if that's a bad word. I'm going to look this word up. Yeah, it sounds like, well, like the proletarian masses are the ones that are the gravediggers of the capitalist society, right? So, we're the gravediggers of the capitalist society, so that's what I hear. Without breaches, literally meaning without breaches, refers to a common working class people of the 18th century of France. Became radically, okay, so they're sans-scoletos, I can't say it, were the driving force and the mainstay of the French Revolution. From that day to this, the French bourgeoisie have lived in terror of revolutionary in Paris. No such conflict took place in the American Revolution, whereas the other two nationalities were born out of civil war. The American nation was born in the national struggle against foreign rule. Despite the very real class differences among the American revolutionaries and the struggle against the loyalists, the bourgeoisie, farmers, artisans, and mechanics were a more or less homogeneous whole against British imperialism. Their ancestors had left European tyranny behind. Now they were clearing it out of the magnificent new country for good. The economic opportunities of this rich and vast new world prevent the extreme sharpness of class relations which characterized the old, but consequently absent of sharp class political differentiations, had powerful subjective reinforcements in the very circumstances under which the American people first felt themselves a nation. It is this which Engels refers to 50 years ago, and today, despite the unprecedented development during the last 25 years. This sense of America being a free country, inherently different from the rest of the world, is still enormously powerful among all sections of the people. It has its drawbacks, but it is its virtues also. But if, except for Shays' rebellion, the American masses did not assert themselves with the vigor and independence of the English petty bourgeoisie and the French sans-culottes, I can't say it, They ran far, far ahead of Europe, politically in the years immediately following their revolution. And in 1825, the battle of manhood suffrage had been won. The vote of the farmers and the masses in the towns exercised an influence upon the ruling class, upon the legislative machinery, and upon the money power, which today might seem more illusory than real. For it to be appreciated, it should be seen in comparison with the conditions of Britain, reputedly the classic country of bourgeois democracy. We have to remember too, that all this greatness came at a cost. It came at a cost of destroying and enslaving. That's what it came at a cost at. Politics and the British worker. In 1776 saw the Declaration of Independence of the American commercial bourgeoisie. The same year appeared the Wealth of Nations, the Declaration of Independence, and the British industrial bourgeoisie. Britain entered upon a period of dazzling economic development. Politically, however, the country had 100 years behind the United States. Feudal remnants had Britain by the throat. K.G. Chesterton has summed up the situation perfectly when he contrasted the commons with the capital C and the commons with a small c. The capitalist aristocracy ruled in the House of the Lords, and their sons, brothers, and son-in-laws sat at the House of Commons in close alliance with the financial and commercial magnates. Not only the masses of the people, but even the rising industrial bourgeoisie were excluded. It took nearly 50 years to break this political stranglehold of the fundamental remnants. Britain reached the verge of revolution in 1832, before the aristocracy gave way. Yet, the Great Reform Bill of 1832 enfranchised only some 200,000 people. The masses whose revolutionary agitation and direct actions were the main cause of the bill being passed were entirely excluded. The political advance was so eminently satisfactory to Lord John Russell, who pioneered the bill, that he became known afterwards as Finality John. We shall understand America better if we continue with Britain. The masses' disappointment with the result of the reform bills started the Chartist agitation. It lasted from 1839 to 1848 and embraced millions of British workers. Its demands were a curious mixture of political and social aspirations, which we shall meet again 40 years later in the Knights of Labor in the United States. Politics, however, predominated. The Chartists demanded universal suffrage, equal electoral areas, payments of members of parliament, no property qualification, vote by ballots, the annual parliaments. But they aimed also at social equality. The workers needed a good house, good clothes, and plenty of good food and drink to make him look and feel happy. They were not quite sure how to achieve all this and wavered between petition and direct action, which on one occasion reached the stage of a half-hearted general strike, on another and plain insurrection. The movement suddenly collapsed in 1848, and in 1846, the corn laws, by which the British landlords had kept up the price of corn, were abolished. The British industrialists, on the basis of cheap food, began that economic development by which Britain dominated the world market for 40 years. The Chartists movement faded away. In 1851, the workers' movement took the form of slow and solid craft unionism, which dominated the British labor movement for 40 years, the same period of time that Britain dominated the world market. It took the same 40 years before Britain achieved manhood suffrage. The workers in the town got the vote only in 1867, and the workers in the country only in 1888. The American Chartists. This is better. Is everybody enjoying this part at least? Hope everybody's enjoying this part. Instead of the whole, like, let's just put Trotsky on this huge pedestal bullshit that kind of, like, irritated me. In America, between 1825 and 1850, industries are at a far low stage of development than they are in Britain. But we have the beginnings of a labor movement, the utopian socialism. The Fourier and Owens flourishes not only in theory but in practice. Yeah, me too. Between 1850 and and if you read Capital, it might be good to look at the history, because at least in like the volume 1, I remember so many different acts that he talked about that had to do with labor. So like it'll probably be good before I read it to understand these things, these historical events, and why he utilizes them in his analysis and shit. So I'm with you. I should probably understand these things better before like I read Capital, or at least as I'm reading Capital, to do research on these things. Let's look them up. We'll look up the chart. Look them up real quick. Let's look that up. Don't say anything. You have the name right there. Hold on. Chartist movement. Okay, the Chartist movement was a mass working class political campaign in Britain that advocated for democratic reforms between 1838 and 1848, named after the People's Charter. Drafted in 1838, the movement sought to give working class men a political voice during the period of severe economic hardship and industrialization. Universal male suffrage, secret ballots, no property qualifications, payments of MPs, which has enabled men of modest means to serve in the parliament, equal electoral districts, annual parliamentary elections. That's the definition, I think. Between 1850 and 1860, the growth of industries brings numerous strikes, fought out with the customary vigor of the American working class. But the political development of the country is overshadowed by the necessity of crushing the slave power. Astonishing development, such as the territorial extent of America. Yeah, exactly. Extent of America, that the crushing of the plantation owners is a regional struggle. The industrial bourgeoisie wins its victory in civil conflict, so gigantic that it is the first great modern war. Yet, it manages this without a single serious clash with workers. The draft riots only lasted a few days. The leaders of the bourgeoisie is a national hero who fights, quote, to save the Union, and later to abolish slavery. Yet the sign of the mass labor movements with political aspirations were ominously clear. This moment, however, was deflected by the richness and the vastness of the country and the absence of feudal relations. In the average European country, there would have been no land. If there had been any, it would have been owned by some nobleman. The Homestead Act, of 1862, which opened up free land to more dissatisfied and adventurous of the proletariat, diluted the independent political aspirations of the working class. America entered upon a period of industrial development comparable to that of Britain between 1784 and 1848. See how long it took them to industrialize compared to like Russia? It took 50 years in Britain to produce Chartism. In America, where the energy of development is so colossal, the movement corresponding to Chartism appeared within less than 10 years. The Knights of Labor was organized in 1869 as a secret society, but in 1879 the secrecy was discarded, and between 1878 and 1886 it developed in much the same way and on much of the same scale that Chartism had developed 40 years before. The Knights wished, quote, to secure to the workers the full enjoyment of the wealth they create, sufficient leisure in which to develop their intellectual and moral and social faculties, of the benefits, recreations and pleasures association. The more important point is how they diluted mass movements with consciousness that separates out. Yeah, like false consciousness. They gave them false consciousness. They gave them like status quo, which satisfies their consciousness to not want to fight or struggle against anything. It happens all the time in the United States. If that's what you're going, that's where I feel like you're going. You know, I could be wrong. The similarities of the ideal of Chartists is very striking. Like the Chartists, the Knights aimed at a new social order, but they were not socialists in the European sense. Yeah, I know, right? Giving up, like the United States seems to like making people petite bourgeois. You know what I mean? Give them that sense of capital, give them the sense of owning capital. And why would they want to stop the system when the system like gives them little bits to benefit them? This, like, I swear to God, like small business owners, like there's tons of them in the United States. Not saying they're successful or anything like that, you know, compared to, but like I think it makes me feel like they give them these status and these ranks so that way they'll be like satisfied not to want to fight for the full emancipation. Gives them the position of exploiting themselves, you know, of other people. You know what I mean? Their main demands were not political because being Americans, they already had political freedom. Yeah, I know, right? It's criticized. Yeah, they always do for their family. When you're, I'm sorry, but no matter what, and that's why capitalism hyper individualize us. But the problem with that is it's a contradiction, especially with human society. Human society is affected by other humans no matter what. There's always going to be social relations, no matter how thinking you're isolated. It's just you're isolated on purpose. When like our normalcy is to be social with each other, you know. I think, like the Chartists and the Knights aimed at a new social order, but they wrote not socialist in the European sense. Their main demands were not political because being Americans, they already had political freedom. But in accordance with their country and their time, they demanded the reserving and public lands and actual settlers, the abolition of contract systems of labor and public works, the 8-hour day, etc. Like the Chartists, the movement aimed to helping all workers in all fields. Suddenly in 1886, the year of the Great Upheaval, the Knights of Labor claimed international attention. Late in 1885, hold on, I'll read it one more time. Yep. Late in the 1885 and the early 1886, a huge strike movement based on their struggles of the 8-hour workday swept over the United States. A number of labor parties sprang into being. In November 1886, candidates of a newly formed labor parties were successful in the municipal elections. In New York City, where the United Labor Party had been formed only in July, it put forward Henry George as candidate. The Democrats got 90,000 votes. George came in the next with 68,000, beating Theodore Roosevelt. The Republicans candidate by 8,000 votes. The Chartists had aimed at more but done much less. Engels in London greeted the upheaval of the dawn of the new age. On June 3rd, he writes to America, quote, 6 months ago, nobody suspected anything, and now they appear all of a sudden in such organized masses as to strike terror into the whole capitalist class. I only wish Marx could have lived to see it. The old man was 66, but he reacted with exuberance of somebody who had just joined the movement. The November after the electoral success, he writes again and takes up the question of National Labor Party. The first great step of importance for every country entering the movement is always the organization of the workers as an independent political party, no matter how, so long as it is distinct workers' party. And this step had been taken far more rapidly than we had a right to hope. And that is the main thing, that the first program of the party is still confused and highly deficient. That is has set up the manner of Henry George. These are inevitable evils, but also only transitory ones. The masses must have time and opportunity to develop, and they can only have the opportunity when they have their own movement, no matter in what form, so far as it is only their own movement, in which they are driven further by their own mistakes and learn wisdom by hurting themselves. The movement in America is in the same condition, and it was with us before 1848. That movement had obtained such electoral successes after only 8 months of existence was absolutely unheard of. Now we got to remember, during those times, the conditions were different when it comes to like voting and stuff. It was much different. It was easier to do legalism that way than it is now. You know, but Lenin proved that legalism was over when he like proved the fact that like voting doesn't do anything. So like now we're in this situation right now, and we've been in this situation for a long time, where legalism there's no answers, because we tried it and it's done. Legalism is over with. Voting is over. You know, we have well-established dictatorship of capital and private property that dictates over us. We have a solid foundation in that. Okay. Don't mean to interrupt, but nice highlight. Point of discussion later. Okay. Comparing the British and America. Okay. All right. Engels warned German immigrants workers in the movement not to be a bona fide working men's party is worthy and infinitely more at present than 100,000 votes for a doctrinally perfect platform. These ideas Engels repeated formally in his introduction to the American edition of the conditions of the working class in England. The passage is worth ample quotation. In February 1885, American public opinion was almost unanimous on this one point, that there was no working class in the European sense of the word in America. That secondly, no class struggle between working men and capitalists, such as torn European societies to pieces, as possible in the American Republic, and that therefore socialism was a thing of foreign importation, which could never take root in American soil. And yet, at that moment, the coming class struggle was casting its gigantic shadow before it in the strikes of the Pennsylvania coal miners and of many other trades, and especially in the preparation all over the country for the great 8-hour movement, which was to come off and did come off in the May following. That I duly appreciate these symptoms, and I anticipated the working class movement on a national scale, my appendix show, but no one could then foresee that in such a short time the movement would burst out with such irresistible force, would spread with a rapidity of a prairie fire, would shake American society to its foundation. The spontaneous and instructive movement of these vast masses of working people over the vast extent of the country, and simultaneous outburst of their common discontent with the miserable social conditions, the same and due to the same causes, made them conscious of the fact that they formed the new and distinct class of American society. And with true American instincts, this consciousness led them to once to take the next step towards their deliverance, the formation of the political workingman party on the platform of its own, and with the consequence of the Capitol and the White House for its goal. The passage which follows is even more significant. For Engels, the working class movement developed in 2 stages: the mass trade union movements acting on the national scale, and the independent labor parties also on a national scale. Usually there is a lengthy period between both of these, but history can develop very rapidly, Engels writes. One, on the more favored soil of America, there were no medieval ruins bar the way where history begins with the elements of modern bourgeois society as involved in the 17th century. The working class passed through these two stages of its development within 10 months. Engels really thought that the movement had come in America. In November 1886, he had written that the American bourgeoisie was persecuting the movement so shamelessly and tyrannically that it would bring matters rapidly to a decision. And if we in Europe do not hurry up, the Americans will soon be ahead of us. That was on November 29th, 3 weeks before, in his preface to the first edition English translation of Capital. He had shown that he was accepting social revolution in Britain. The number of unemployed in Britain was swelling over from year to year, and we can almost calculate the moment when the unemployed, losing patience, will take their own fate into their own hands. In both instances, the expectation was not realized. In Britain, the British bourgeoisie solved the problem by the export of finance capital, thus ushering the new age of imperialism. In the United States, once more, the vastness of richness of the country came to the rescue of the bourgeoisie. But he's got to also... hold on, let me read this. He's got to remember that we did inter-imperialism. We did imperialism through the Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was just another form of imperialism. When we took Hawaii, that's imperialism. When we took other things, we did imperialism. So, I don't know. I think we started with our own soil with imperialism. You mean? That's my point of view. I'm going to look ahead because I got 10 minutes and I'm at a stopping point. The turn of the century. So, let's remember page 160 real quick. Sometimes it's like just 2 more pages till I get to another one. Oh, this one's not. Oh, okay. I'm going to read the rest and we'll be done. Okay. The turn of the century. Let us once more take rapid survey of British development. It was only 3 years after Engels' preface to the English edition of Capital, and Britain found itself in turmoil. The year 1889 was the year of 2 famous strikes in Britain, the dock strike and the match girl strike. There was none of the violence associated with similar large-scale action in the United States. The strikes, in fact, invoked great popular sympathy. They were triumphant, and they marked the beginning of an organization of unskilled workers in Britain. Let us note that this took place precisely in the moment when Britain was beginning to lose its almost exclusive domination of the world market and trust. And just a few years later, after the working class in the agriculture areas had got the vote, but the long lag behind the political activity of the American masses was now rapidly overcome. Hitherto, the British working class had no whole supported the Liberals in 1892. However, Carey Hardee, a Scottish miner and avowed socialist, founded the first independent Labour Party. Then, as now, there was the usual limitation of the formation of an independent Labour Party would weaken the progressive vote, and so let in the reactionaries. For many years, there had been working class members of the Parliament elected from predominantly working class constituencies. They had supported the Labor-Liberal combination almost extensively, but the work of Marx and Engels and their associates on the First International now bore fruit. By 1899, the Joint Committee of the Trade Union Congress, the Independent Labor Party, and the most socialist societies, and some socialist societies was organized. The British Labour Party was on its way. In 1906, out of 50 candidates, 29 were successful. In 1918, there were 61 members in Parliament. In 1922, 142 members. In 1923, 191. And the first Labour government took office in 1924. Even for Britain, this development was extraordinary, taking into consideration the long years that the British workers had to fight in order to gain manhood suffrage towards the end of the century. One reason for the success lay in the strength of the trade unions movement, which is the base of the Labour Party of Britain. And the strength of the trade union movement lay not only in the cohesiveness of the British people, but in fact that between 1848 and the end of the century, Britain became industrialized to a degree far surpassing that of any other European country. Britain imported food and raw material and exported manufacturing goods. The population was proletarianized until by 1914, Britain was between 60% and 70% proletarian. On this basis, the political pressures of the declining economy, the British workers pushed ahead in the representation of their interests by the National Labour Party. Exactly the opposite is developed in America. After 1886, the Knights of Labor rapidly declined. American labor historians have blamed the failure upon the weakness of the bureaucracy, etc. There is no need to get into this question here. It is sufficient that immediately after the failure of the Knights, the American Federation of Labor emerged in prominence and took much of the same place in the American labor movement that the craft unions in Britain had taken after the Charleston fiasco of 1848. Engels visited America in 1888. He saw firsthand the immigrant problem and other subjective difficulties from which the American working class suffered. In 1892, he put his finger on the fundamental weakness behind its slow political development. Land is the basis of speculation, and American speculative mania and speculative opportunities are the chief levers that hold the native-born workers in bondage to the bourgeoisie. Only when there is a generation of native-born workers that cannot expect anything from speculation anymore we will have a solid foothold in America. Yet, so strong was his belief that the national characteristics would find powerful expressions in American proletariat, that it was in that very 1892, after the failure of the Knights was patent, that he penned the confident words which had this article. History slowly, but nevertheless surely, is justifying its concept of American development between 1880 and 1914. American industry developed with a colossal American energy, and the American proletariat reacted with equal vigor. The Homestead Strike of 1892, the Pullman Strike of 1894, and the Anthracite coal miners' strike in 1902. These were working class actions which astonished the world and in Engels' word, struck terror into the hearts of the American bourgeoisie. But whereas in Britain, industry overwhelmingly outdistanced agriculture, in the United States, American industries developed not only itself, but American agriculture as well. The total population of the United States in 1960s was not 30 million. In 1910, there was more than 50 million people living on farms or in villages dependent upon agriculture. The AFL grew steadily and high carbon coal, thank you. And the AFL grew steadily, and the Socialist Party appeared towards the end of the century. By 1908, however, the Socialist Party could boast of only one member of Congress. In 1914, the National Party of Labor was pretty much where it had been after the failure of the Knights of Labor. Yet the colossal energy of the development was perfectly visible, though Engels was not there to trace it after 1895. The later development of agriculture was thoroughly capitalistic. The distributions which capitalism carries out the countryside, the financial swindling, raised the wrath of the farmers, and they replied with a populist movement, which repeatedly rocked the whole political life of the country. Though the rapid penetration of industry into the West prevented the organized extension to trade unions, such as characterized countries with more peaceful development, like Britain and Germany. Yet even these unstable conditions, the American working class reached with the organization unique in the history of organized labor. In the years just previous to World War I, the the work of the IWW among the textile workers in Massachusetts, in the West Federation of Miners among nomadic workers, such as the lumbermen and longshoremen, gave them a reputation which spread over the whole world and earned them the ferocious hatred of the American bourgeoisie. Their strikes for, quote, free speech and the fearless energies with which they threw themselves into all their industrial struggles made them internationally famous. Their songs and slogans have traveled all over the world. It is particularly remarkable because only for a few years in Australia did the movement ever take hold in other country, in any other country. It was the characteristics of American phenomenon. The end of World War I saw the United States pass rapidly through a period of export finance capital. By 1929, however, the world crises put an end to capitalist expansion on the world scale, whereupon the most capitalistic of all countries experienced a crisis of the scope of a depth far exceeding all other previous crises, and the greater than that of all the other countries the world put together. America had now reached the stage that Britain had reached in 1889. The American proletariat, true to the national tradition, replied in kind. History will record that between 1935 and 1943, the American proletariat and the organization of the CIO did exactly what Engels 50 years before had prophesied. Once the Americans get started, it will be with an energy of violence compared with which we in Europe shall be mere children. The land boom is now over. The immigrant elements are being kneaded into a whole. The organization of labor and the struggle on the industrial field have given the American workers the class consciousness which has been so absent in the past. Now the class consciousness is like gone. I fear. The American proletariat now faces an organization of an independent national labor party. We need have no doubt that when the movement comes, it will be true in its traditions. November 1943. And we'll stop here on chapter 11, the international traditions, the task ahead for American labor. I wish it was like that now, but like, I don't know, man. Like the bourgeoisie have like made the proletariat in the United States just so disillusioned with like this false consciousness, at least the white American proletariat. Add a bookmark. All right, stopping at 164. And that will be it. Great. That last bit is exactly what America needs to read. Yes, I would say so. But all this stuff is always kept from us because if we learn about the past, about how revolutionary we were, it would be devastating for the American bourgeoisie. But the American bourgeoisie are also making it like I feel like they're deproletarianizing people and giving them to like the status of business owners, even if they're just their own employed business. It still gives them the status of a like a little bit of a petite bourgeois type of thing. So I don't know. I think they've done a good job to after like the Black Panther Party and all that stuff. They're doing a pretty good job at really displacing us and giving people false consciousness, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think the major contradiction though is the United States imperialism that needs to be destroyed, because I think we need to turn all these things into fucking like a civil war. I don't know what to do, honestly. I have my thoughts and everything like that. But this is pretty good analysis. I think it was pretty good. There had no beef with it. No beef with it. I just had beef with the great manning of like barely any like critique of Trotsky. It was fucking annoying. Yeah. And that's the problem. See, like, we live in the condition. We live in the United States. We should study the past. We should utilize historical materialism. And we should do that. You know, we were so focused. And I get, like, as a Marxist, like, we're internationalists. And we're so focused on the global phenomenon. But we cannot do anything unless we address here. You know what I mean? You did? You did have some beef? What was your beef? If you remember. I want to hear it before I close. It's always good to hear people's beefs. It might help me to learn too. If you don't remember, it's fine too. Okay. So what they're saying is the lack of imperializing within the text. You're saying they did more? Okay. All right. That's a fair critique. If they didn't elaborate it further and they kind of like made it softer, that's a fair critique. I don't know much. I know that like they still kind of imperialized like the tea. The tea did not come from Britain. It came from either China or it came from India. You know what I mean? So yeah. I'll take that critique. That's a good critique. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it. Does anybody else have anything to say before I close it out? Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Yusuf. Sorry we couldn't get you guys any coins. I feel bad. I don't have any. But if not, I will go ahead and close it out. I hope everybody enjoys their evening. Not that party specifically, but you get it. Yeah, I do. But today I took a break from Marx. I'm reading Marx's economic manuscripts of 1844 or something like that. So I'm reading that right now, and I took a break today because I built a cat sanctuary for my kitty, so I didn't get a chance to read it today. So it's very interesting. I like it. I can't wait to study it more. I have like I have lots of things to study. I have to study materialism, historical materialism, and stuff like that. But yeah. Anyways, love y'all. I hope y'all have a good evening.